Future trends, deep insights, industry leaders. This is the iGaming Next podcast with your host, Michael Pedersen.
Welcome back to iGaming Next Online.
There's not just one goal, there's multiple goals. Ignore dilution if the deal's good, because you'll make more from a bigger pot.
It wasn't that people preferred the office or preferred remote. They actually preferred the option.
In other words, COVID-19 is giving us a glimpse into the future.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are and what you're doing. It is a fantastic day today because it is the very first iGaming Next marketing session and podcast. And you're listening to this as part of the Bright Future online event and also on the podcast series everywhere you listen to podcasts. Today, I am so excited because we have, I don't know how to describe you, Chris. I almost sort of feel like saying the OG of Google. Is that a fair description? Sort of like the original gangster of Google. Is that fair?
I mean, that's one way. That's one way. I don't think I quite qualify for industry vet status just yet, but I've been around for a while.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your background a little bit, Chris. Let's start back in the days. Where did you grow up? Where are you from?
So I'm from the north of England, a lovely little town called Stockport, which is just in Greater Manchester. Okay. So grew up there. Small family, lots of friends. Wanted to escape as quickly as possible, and that was pretty much what started me on my journey down to London through university and various roles and ended up eventually at Google.
Okay. So how long have you been in London now then?
So London, I think 17 years via a couple of stops elsewhere as part of my ventures through the gambling industry.
Yeah.
Started off, took a graduate role at Betfair.
Yeah.
When 2005, 2006. I remember at the time, actually, I got an email from both Microsoft and Betfair on the same day to say, woohoo, you've been accepted into the graduate program for both. And I remember having a conversation with my parents at the time.
Wow.
And both of them being super chuffed that I joined Microsoft. And going off and telling all of their friends and family that Chris is now working for Microsoft, only to disappoint them mere minutes later by letting them know that I'd actually, in fact, turned the Microsoft offer down and I'd be going to Betfair. They weren't aware of the countless hours spent in the university library on the exchange or playing poker. This was 2001, 2002. This is before, clearly, Wi-Fi was a thing in university dorms. We didn't have the internet. We didn't actually have the internet in the university dorms that I was in. So if you wanted to use or get online, you had to go into the library. So the 24-hour binges playing poker were very much done through the guise of working really hard in the library. But that very much set me up for a move into the industry and a grad role. I think it was actually the first graduate intake at Betfair, as I said, 2005.
Yeah, wow. So you're a poker player during university as well, or?
A bad one, a pretty bad one. I did okay. I did okay. I think I used to focus specifically on the hours in which both the East Coast and West Coast of the US would be coming in from drinking sessions. That was very much the hour or two. Yeah, they were the prime hours. That was the hour or two of capitalization, whereby you get yourself to a point where you think there should be some relatively easy money, and we didn't need a lot to survive on it at uni. And I worked a little bit before going to university, and with the cash roll that was on offer from that student loan check that came in, I was somewhat a kid in a candy shop, and I was in a reasonable place, and sports betting and whatever else would go on in the background. So Betfair, you could say, was a perfect fit for me.
Yeah, for sure. And then you spent about 6 years with Betfair.
Yes. So started off, as I said, in the graduate program, and there did a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things. I think my first job was creating CRM emails using Dreamweaver.
Okay.
which was fun. Yeah, I'd played around with affiliate sites again whilst I was at uni, so I was somewhat familiar with Dreamweaver, but that was 3 months of hard labor playing around within Dreamweaver software. And then I shifted to be an analyst for probably 6 months, comparing RTPs on slot games and whatever else, and then looking at liquidity on on whatever competition existed to Betfair at the time, mostly BetDAC, WBX. I'm not sure WBX even exists anymore, and a bunch of others, just in terms to get a feeling for where Betfair stood from a liquidity point of view, volume, and prices, and whatever else. And then I had a stint in the poker team, which was great for me. I was actually part of the event team for the World Series of Poker Europe, the Annette Oberstad year.
Wow!
And I remember my first job as part of that role was to supervise a bunch of dancers as we tried to recreate the Vegas theme at our Stevenage call center. So we had a white stretch limo, picked them up from Hammersmith, picked me up from Hammersmith. We collected 10 dancers, drove to Stevenage, paraded through the call center. I don't know why. I was, 21, 22 at the time. I didn't care. I was supervising 10 dancers. Yeah. And then we drove back to Oxford Circus to the Empire Casino. They set up outside the Empire Casino whilst the World Series of Poker Europe was happening inside. And that was a day in the life of a Betfair grad.
Well, I was going to say that's quite a graduate program they have running there.
I think it's gone drastically downhill since.
Yeah, probably.
it turns out when a company's private, you can pretty much get away with anything. And then I think once the IPO happened, it was steadily downhill. I think the grads actually have proper jobs there now.
Yeah,
probably a good thing for a lot of them, but I'm not quite sure that would work that well for me.
For sure. And then you spent 6 years, finished off as head of UK acquisition. Is that correct?
Yeah, so as part of the graduate scheme, obviously you rotate around a lot and try a bunch of different things. I did a couple of stints in the marketing teams, as part of the CRM team with Dreamweaver, but also spent a bit of time in Malta with the casino team, working on their go-to-market strategy as we were launching the product. And as part of that, got really into just the general specifics of online marketing. At that time, it was more so affiliates and display activity. Google search wasn't open. Wasn't open back then. So elements of SEO and whatever else. And because I'd done some affiliate work myself, I had a little bit of an understanding as to what was involved. Got really into that. Came back, found a job within the central services team at Betfair, and then steadily progressed through that. I was really fortunate in that I think 2 or 3 line managers left within a 3 to 6 month period, and I just so happened to be the tallest person in the room. So I got picked on every single time to step up, and very quickly found myself leading a fairly significant team and managing a fairly chunky budget as we were trying to mass market the betting exchange amongst a bunch of other products. And it's something that I've got the war stories today that I can lean on when working with operators who are trying to promote a sports book, and I'm trying to explain to them that it's relatively easy trying to promote a sports book versus trying to create a conversion funnel for a betting exchange that essentially screams pink and blue flashing numbers the moment you land on site. And for anyone wanting to place a pretty simple accumulator, it's a pretty horrible experience. So trying to drive a competitive CPA with volumes that could grow the Betfair business, as you can see now, they've flipped quite heavily to being sportsbook first. There were some tough times, but equally at the same time, being thrown at the deep end always makes it a little bit more interesting. The learning curve's fairly more significant, and it certainly put me in a good place today. Then ultimately kind of growing through that to lead the team, and then Google came calling. A chap called Fintan Costello. I'm not sure if you've ever bumped into Fintan. I knew Fintan quite well just through the industry, and he was building out a team at the time, and basically took me out drinking, and which is typically what he does. And essentially said, "Look, we've got an opportunity. If you fancy it, You have to obviously survive the interviews, but if you can get through, I think we can do some interesting things as Google's trying to expand its gambling team.
Yeah.
I think he moved on 18 months later. I've hung around since, and we've grown the team into bigger and better things. I now look after CFDs and Forex. We did look after ticketing and a bunch of other performance type channels. But main responsibility remains looking after the gambling industry.
Okay. So Fintan is the OG actually of Google then for gambling.
Fintan's the OG. If you were to talk to Fintan, he might well say a chap called James Cashmore, but yeah, no, Fintan certainly. Certainly. The name Fintan Costello certainly still resonates around Google Towers.
And now 9 years and a bit with Google. And as you mentioned, covering a number of different verticals, but gambling probably being the largest, if I understand you correctly, or the one you spent the most time. Is that correctly understood? Or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the Forex and CFD industry is significant and vast in itself, but gambling takes up more of my time. Certainly with what's been happening from a global perspective. But the job has very much changed. In those 8 or 9 years, when I first came in, it was very much helping companies understand search.
Yeah,
it was understanding search. There was an element of double click, as that purchase went through, an element of the GDN, but it was mostly search, and we were helping operators and some affiliates to take advantage of the product set that we had, and any changes to the product, helping to educate and helping to understand how they could hit their objectives.
Yeah.
But the advent of 4G, smartphones, cloud computing, Netflix, over the top content consumption changes, a whole bunch of things has now meant that my world, while search is still a reasonable chunk of it, is now also dominated by video and YouTube. Yeah. Google marketing platform and the programmatic pipes, apps, Google Play, cloud. Yeah. What does that mean? So there's more of a convergence of several products that take up mine and the team's time, and it's obviously a complicated the role. And if we find it tough, to understand the product set, God knows how our users and customers deal with that. So it's very much our responsibility to help to normalize all the complicated things that are going on at Google. And when the job's going well, we're partnering with the largest operators. We're helping to build long-term plans. We're helping to hit company targets using Google products. When it's not going so well, it's usually policy related. Yeah. Someone's usually on the phone to me asking
Google policy bunker somewhere.
And asking why said country isn't open, or what are our plans to open up in said country, or why certain products doesn't allow for X but it does allow for Y, and what does that mean? So we spend a little bit of time trying to act as a go-between from our legal, trust and safety and policy teams to the user teams, because ultimately, simply put, my role is to be a voice for the industry in Google, to help champion the industry and to help create positive change. Yeah. We've done that in a bunch of ways, but that's predominantly what I'm being tasked with.
For sure. So you have a very unique perspective. So you've been a poker player, a player yourself. You were 6 years with Betfair on the operator side of things, and now 9 years with Google. But so let's try a fun exercise. So if you take the 9 years at Google, and you had to sort of look back over the 9 years, and I'll give you like 1 minute to take us like from 9 years back till now, sort of the key milestones, or some of the things that really sort of spring out in your mind, the biggest steps of the Google journey, if you will, or product launches or changes to the landscape, whatever happened. How would you describe the last nine years in 1 minute?
Wow, in 1 minute. God, so much has happened that makes that quite complicated. So I think DoubleClick and everything that went on with DoubleClick was huge. I think enterprise search bidding products and all of that change was great in terms of just what was capable. Video has perhaps been the biggest thing. It was certainly something that we loosely talked about when I first started, and as I said before, it makes up a significant chunk of what I do now. Hosting live games on YouTube, allowing gambling advertisers to position themselves against those live games. Obviously, there's been some regulatory changes with what we can do there. Yeah, that's all been super exciting. I could get quite geeky and talk to when we shifted how AdWords works with enhanced campaigns, which went down. It didn't go down great, and trying to mitigate and manage that situation was a fun one. what we've done with AdMob and bringing that in, what's that meant on the app side as well has been really interesting. And then just automation and machine learning and everything that now means. Again, if I was to say video dominates a lot of what I talk about, machine learning and automation probably makes up the rest of it. It's predominant across every single thing that we do. It's go-to from a product point of view, and again, that dominates. Then we've got some policy wins along the way. Most recently, we managed to open the Play Store in 15 more countries, which is clearly a good thing. We've managed to do some positives around category opt-out, whereby users can now opt out of receiving ads for gambling and alcohol. A huge win for us, and helps us position the products as being something that's sustainable, for this industry. And we have a bunch of other protections that are built into that. So, quick whistle stop tour. I'm not sure if that was a minute.
No, that's fantastic. How about, I was just thinking, the move from desktop to mobile over 9 years, was that already sort of still quite big, the mobile side, or have you seen a change there? Or
well, clearly significant change, but I've always felt that the gambling industry was probably 2, 3, 4 years ahead of everybody else within that space. It very naturally fell into the mobile space, and whilst that started however many years ago with WAP or whatever else, I always felt in working with the operators, there was never a need for me to go in and educate on the role of mobile. Or have to go in and tell them how big mobile was going to be. They all kind of got it. And that was very different to retail, very different to travel, where it always felt like a constant battle. It felt that you were constantly up against it in terms of trying
You're still talking mobile, probably, there.
Industries. still. And you'll often get you'll always get the throwaway brief where they'll want to talk about, they haven't quite managed to understand mobile yet, but they'll want to talk about augmented reality. That's always the interesting with some of those industries. I always felt the gambling industry just got it, and they were just hoping that we would move along at a pace that would allow them to remain competitive. So that was always a good thing, certainly for this industry.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for that, Chris. So just before we jump into sort of the specific topics and questions, just sort of to sort of set the stage a bit. So I was reading up on eMarketer, a few references. So if we look at 2020, on a very global wide sense, there was an increase in media consumption and advertising, most probably as people were staying home and lockdowns and what have you, but a decrease in advertising spend overall. So there was a 1% decline in global ad spend, but there was a 13% increase in digital ad spend. So definitely a move over to digital. And then they were sort of forecasting into 21. And they were mentioning that 55%, so 2021 will see 55% digital ad spend on display channels and 40% on search. So what they were saying was, if you compare that to sort of 3 years ago, the gap between display and search, and I guess display, they sort of bucket everything in everything that's not search, effectively they put into one bucket. That gap is widening, effectively moving from 10 to 15%. So more spend flowing into the display bucket. So if we just look at the sort of the global trends, the shift towards digital, and sort of these two buckets, display versus search, are you seeing some of the same sort of trends where you're sitting, Chris? What's your view on the year that has passed and the year we're going through at the minute?
Yeah, look, it's a nice place to start. If you were to look at the market cap of a Google or an Alphabet or a Facebook or a Twitter, or Amazon, albeit it's difficult to carve out its media division, coming out of the pandemic, they're all considerably up year on year, and given the size and scale of those businesses, that's no mean feat. And if you were to listen to the Microsoft CEO, he'll talk to 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. I think McKinsey coins it as 10 years worth in 3 months, certainly from a US e-commerce penetration point of view. I think my favorite kind of throwaway line is that as to how it's been coined is the quickening and the great acceleration. And simply put, more people are online. I mean, we can confuse it as much as we want to, but more people are online. And many of our old habits have changed, and in some cases permanently. It's helped us to break a bunch of old habit loops, and of the numbers that we're seeing, a considerable percentage are new online users. If I was to look at my gran up there in Stockport in the northwest, she's probably now got five retail apps on her phone from having none previously, and she prefers to do the Friday big shop and have that delivered to her as opposed to going out. So that's net new business. That's net new eyeballs. And I mean, it still doesn't prevent the horrible process that is returning something that's been delivered online, but that's just a beast that I think we're all going to have to live with for the rest of our lives. But what that's meant is that ad dollars will simply follow the users. And so when you think about the growth of digital, so if you think about marketing in general, advertising in general has taken a little bit of a hit, which was always typically going to be the case coming out of a pandemic as budgets were looked at. Digital's actually done quite well. Simply because the eyeballs have flowed more to digital. And then there's some cuts of that data. If you look at the travel industry in general, down for very obvious reasons, whereas retail and e-commerce massively up, again for obvious reasons. And gambling has done pretty well. It's been certainly from the digital side, and again we can cut it by the various industries, but from the digital side, there's been on the sports betting side, a perfect storm, if you will, once events kicked back on, and for the casino, bingo, and poker industries, poker in itself, was up whatever that was, 250% or whatever. So in general, digital marketing, has come out of this in a positive way. Video perhaps being, I think video is perhaps the single best example. And by that, I mean, if you think about consumer behavior, I myself, as someone who works for YouTube, had never heard of Joe Wicks before the pandemic. Now, I've probably done X amount of HIIT exercise classes. I didn't even know what a HIIT exercise class was pre-pandemic. But I've probably done X amount of HIIT exercise classes through YouTube, through my TV, than I'd ever done before. And when we think about, you mentioned content consumption habits, that's been perhaps one of the biggest changes that has helped to facilitate and accelerate advertising dollars coming online, because eyeballs are now watching online video far more than they ever were before. And that's been huge. And us sitting with YouTube, probably the largest commercial online video platform in the world, has been great for us. But that's typically what has seen that drive, and that's why, from a digital point of view, advertising spend has gone up, whereas in general, it's not quite the same.
And let's pick our crystal ball a bit. So what's going to happen now when countries open up and we go back to normal or new normal or whatever we call it? What do you think is going to happen to those consumption habits and the video consumption and in general? Are we gonna find a new but much higher level? Are we going back to where we were? Are we going to stay where we are now? Like, what's your best guess?
Yeah, I certainly don't think we'll go back to where we were. I think I hate to say this, but there is a new normal. And I think we're all somewhat comfortable with that new normal, albeit in different parts of the world. We would often talk to the future being here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I was on a call with some of our colleagues in Dublin earlier today, and they're still thinking through what coming out of lockdown looks like. Whereas for myself, sat here in London, we've been out of lockdown for best part of 2 months. And we're already starting to enjoy some of the freedoms that we took for granted. Previously. But I certainly am living with some new normals, and we see that in the search behavior that we see for users, and that's arguably one of the biggest arbiters, or certainly one of the biggest research units that we can call upon to understand what that new normal could be.
Your gran is going to continue shopping on Fridays online. Yeah.
Oh, big time. Yeah, and I can't see her ever going to a shop again. Just good.
Exactly.
She'll fundamentally get lazier.
And whoever has been ordering food online to a much greater extent will not just suddenly stop and purely go to restaurants, right? So that the online side of food delivery will most likely also remain, right?
Oh yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And we see it within this industry as well. April's a difficult month to look at, given where we were with the lockdown and the cancellation of events. But sports betting queries in April were up 300% year on year.
Yeah.
Whereas for April, from a poker point of view, it was down 65% year on year. But again, previously in April 2020, poker was up 220%.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it a little bit in gambling in terms of how users are querying and looking for information and whatever else. But in general, no, I think we'll have some kind of hybrid future whereby people are just far more comfortable utilizing online propositions. Those that were already digitally native and those that were already relatively savvy from a digitally point of view have probably gone a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And those that were perhaps new to all of the experiences that digital can offer them will probably lean into a greater degree. It certainly won't become the new normal, I'd imagine, for a few generations, but they'll certainly lean in far more than they did previously. So this will net out with a far greater, there'll be a far greater balance towards digital.
Makes absolutely sense. Good. So one of the very, very sort of hot topics, if you will, is it's been going on for a while, but even more so is sort of privacy, third-party cookies, first-party cookies, zero-party data, all these kind of things. So let's try and set the scene a little bit. So Google has been quite sort of leading the field in terms of announcing stopping third-party cookie tracking in the Chrome browser, at least, right? So just give us the brief summary from your side. How is it on the inside of Google at the minute? Speaking about privacy, third-party Google cookies, et cetera, et cetera. What's the latest and greatest?
Well, first and foremost, it's complicated.
Yes,
it's very complicated. I've sat through up-team training sessions on what the future will look like and what does that mean from a privacy perspective. And first and foremost, marketing fundamentally won't change. There will still be, or you will still have to have a almost religious-like focus on the customer. You'll have to think through the purchase funnel. You'll have to work through awareness through to action and loyalty.
But there's no big bang, right? People get scared, right? Third-party cookies gone. What are we going to do now? A lot of people are sort of concerned about that. So let's just underline that. There's not going to be a big bang. We will figure this out. Is that correct?
We will. And there are a bunch of solutions that are already being put out there. And perhaps we can talk to that. We can talk to that in a few minutes. I think it probably makes sense just to set the scene a little with what's got us to this point.
Yeah.
And I think understanding the reasons behind the privacy changes, certainly from a CMO and a C-level point of view, are essential in terms of setting future strategy. So if you think, number one, users just lacking trust and just demanding greater privacy. There was a Deloitte study that spoke to 81% of consumers reported taking some kind of an action based on privacy concerns, whether that's deleting an app or deleting their browser history, deleting cookies, or whatever else. So 81% of users, that's huge. That's significant. So from a user point of view, there's clearly the need for some kind of change. We're now seeing that change. So point two would be the browser changes. This is where it all starts to get quite complicated, between Safari, Mozilla, and then what's been going on with Chrome. But Safari for a long time has had an issue with third-party cookies. And, as apps were introduced, that started to create some issues with tracking in itself. Mozilla's then gone a little bit further in some of the changes that it has made through its ETP program compared to Safari's ITP program. And as with everything digital and online marketing, there's enough acronyms to confuse everyone. And then Chrome's followed suit to a degree, albeit Chrome's has had to take a slightly different position, as it needs to recognize and understand the full ecosystem of users, publishers. We need an ad-funded web, so we have to be conscious of that, and then advertisers as well. And third-party cookies have been huge in terms of helping them attribute value, target, measure performance, or whatever else. So that's probably number 2 in terms of the big privacy changes, in terms of the big browser changes, and then there's the big regulatory changes as well. And these would have been the big changes that really made the headlines 2 or 3 years ago. From a Europe point of view, it was GDPR, all about consent, ticking all of those boxes every time you go onto a web page. Cambridge Analytica probably didn't do any of us any favors, albeit anyone who works in digital marketing has probably ever watched the documentary or read about that, thinking that's just kind of what we do. I think from talking to a couple of friends who either worked there or who know someone worked there, were quite happily talk to how it was blown massively out of proportion in terms of what they were actually doing, and it was one boastful CEO perhaps talking out of turn with what was actually going on. But that's the story was already out there. The US has their version of GDPR now. South America's got its own version, not necessarily South America, Brazil, and whatever else. So that's going to become the norm. So there's three big drivers of change between users, browser changes, and then regulatory changes.
It's coming. It's here to stay, and now we need to figure out how do we deal with this, right? And what do we do going forward? So segueing into that, what sort of consequences do you see for the iGaming industry when this is coming in, and more importantly, what are the solutions for the operators, the affiliates, anyone who's very interested in this topic? How should they be thinking?
So that's a really interesting one, and I sit here with my Google hat on, so I could give you the Google blurb on what does that mean for privacy. But fundamentally, we need to be in a position whereby you have a business that is comfortable with change, and a business that's ready to understand, what's gone on with privacy, and therefore make adjustments in terms of your setup. So, if you were to think through, a third-party cookie, and what does that mean? Well, the use of third-party cookie are targeting, personalization, and measurement. Third-party cookies have helped support the ad-supported web for a long time. They help publishers make more money. They help advertisers reduce wastage. And if you're a publisher within this space, let's say you're the New York Times, for example, and you have 6 million subscribers, that's a hell of a lot of data that you can work with. Equally, if you're Google or Facebook, so there's going to be partnerships that you can still try to kind of manufacture and build media plans around that won't necessarily change. So if I'm an operator or I'm an affiliate, I'm still thinking about my media mix. I'm still thinking through, well, does this drastically change from a Google point of view? Does this drastically change from a Facebook point of view? Does this drastically change in my affiliates? Perhaps not. Does this just drastically change with some of the big display media buys that I'm making? Probably not. You will have to make some changes. So from a Google point of view, for you to take advantage of most of our future technologies, you would have to have something called a global site tag that you're putting in place on all web pages. And that's something that we're monitoring very closely, because we know that's what will help fuel a privacy driven future. I'm sure Facebook have an equivalent. I'm sure Amazon probably have an equivalent. So if I'm an operator, I'm starting to think, well, what does that mean for us? And then I'm becoming, there's probably the need to become more comfortable with gaps in your data. That's just going to be, the nature of the future. And when you're thinking about tracking, one has to get comfortable with this idea of prediction more so than precision. And by that, I mean, you're going to need to augment your data. There's going to need to be far more modeling. Certainly when working with some of the big platforms and when working with some of your media partners in terms of how they understand, who's converted where, because without a cookie to do that, then we're all going to be struggling.
Mm-hmm.
But what you will find is there will be some solutions that are brought up to plug the gaps that are lost through cookies. So if you think about targeting and prospecting, what you'll start to see is audience segments, and there will be clusters. Again, from a Google point of view, we have however many billion users across our 7 products. So we have the scale with which to build these clusters, and we can offer them as in-market audience. Again, that's very much prediction. You can offer them as affinity targeting, so interest targeting, and you can augment your prospecting activity with those audience lists. So again, you're not seeing any drastic changes.
So the targeting options are still available. It's just like you're saying, let's say less precise. It's clusters. It's bigger groups to make the individual user sort of disappear in the crowd, if you will. So you can't target that accurately. And then you said from precision to prediction.
Yeah, it's being more comfortable. This idea of the single customer view. That's not really a thing anymore. Certainly when you go cross-channel, that's not really a thing. When you think about multi-touch attribution, that becomes quite difficult to do. Again, when you're going cross-channel, data-driven attribution can still be a thing, certainly within individual platforms. But this idea of precision becomes quite complicated. One-to-one marketing, whatever it was, the right customer at the right time with the right ad, that becomes somewhat of a struggle. And it's being comfortable with the idea of prediction. And there's a need to have better first-party data. But again, for the gambling industry, it's not as big a story. What you will typically hear with any privacy narrative, the first thing, the go-to next line is first-party data. But with the gambling industry, it's very much a pure play online industry anyway. The mechanic, the KYC process of playing a game requires a sign up.
Yeah.
So the industry, by and large, has a hell of a lot of first-party data. It could probably do a few more interesting things with that first-party data.
Yeah.
But it generally has first-party data. But
what it will need to be for the existing base, right? But I guess that's more the sort of the prospecting part of the equation. How do we find new customers, right?
Yeah, and that's where in the US, for example, even across Europe, free-to-play games starting to become quite interesting. There are ways in which operators and affiliates can adjust their model to think about products that they can perhaps put out there that might not well generate revenue, but are there simply to collect first-party data, to augment their existing data, to help them do more interesting things with. So, there are some fairly subtle changes that could be made as well. But the industry is in a reasonable place.
So if we simplify this, if we try and take 2 steps back, so as an operator, let's say, I would, in order to collect first-party data, I would create a free-to-play game or a free-to-play sweepstake or whatever I could do, put that out there, use that to collect first-party data effectively, and potentially that could play into my acquisition strategy overall. And then I'm collecting that data. Then I'm still able to take that pool of data for targeting purposes. Is that correctly understood?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you've got the necessary consent.
Yeah, obviously.
Then that becomes a given, I think now. But then, absolutely. I mean, that's first-party data, and you're free to use that data as you would, as you wish. Which is what makes Sky Bet Super 6 such a powerful product. Certainly in a world in which prospecting will be a little tougher. There will be opportunities, but it will be a little tougher.
So it's about being creative. It's about getting comfortable with not being 100% accurate, and and
that talks to the cultural point I made up front. That fast fail, that experimentation type culture. Look, these are easy throwaway things to say.
Yeah.
But being happy at 70% accurate, or being happy with a project, being taken on, that's got a 70% chance of success. I think that's what we're going to need to see in order to create the necessary change, to adjust to what will be, and again, hate to say it, a new normal and a privacy-centric future.
Yeah, and give us a sense of where do you see us being in this timeline, Chris, from third party to shifting fully to first party or zero party data?
I mean, to a degree, we're right in the middle. We're right in the middle. Safari's already made some fairly significant changes, and given how mobile first this industry is, and the role of Safari, most of that data isn't trackable. A lot of the conversions that we see will probably be modeled off the back of Chrome data, given that cookies are still available. But then Chrome has put out a timeline with which it wants to remove third-party data. I think that's probably a year or so from today. So there will be some significant changes that start to land through something known as the privacy sandbox, but I don't know if we want to go into that today.
No.
And that will present some changes that marketers and practitioners will need to get comfortable with. So we're probably right in the middle. And I think for anyone listening, if you haven't already thought about a privacy pillar as part of your business strategy, or at the very least as part of your marketing strategy, then that's probably a problem. Yeah. And you would probably need to think about who you can bring in from the engineering, tech, and product side to sit on a project pillar with some practitioners on the marketing side to figure out, well, what do we do about this? Because the ultimate winners out of this, certainly from a marketing point of view, and therefore a new customer point of view, be the ones who can make best use of the data they have, and also partner with the best products, the best platforms, and the best publishers to use the data that they have to augment their data, and therefore advertise effectively and either acquire new customers or upsell or reduce churn or whatever else you would typically do off your own site.
And that's a great segue. We spoke a bit earlier, Chris, and you mentioned one thing that is also coming, also talking about sort of getting comfortable with less precision. So you mentioned the rise of keywordless search. So do you want to? We're going from we're just attacking the big topics here. Maybe we should take a quick jingle here and have a glass of water. I had to use that fancy sound effect. Chris, keywordless search. What does that mean? What's coming?
Yeah, so I don't want to scare everyone. I think this chat needs to be heavily caveated up front that I don't work on our search product team. And unfortunately for me, our search product team doesn't have a direct line into me whereby they want to give me updates with all the changes that we're making. But the direction of travel is pretty clear. And I think, when we were having a very brief chat earlier on, I said that this could potentially be an interesting subject. It's more so because of the direction of travel. Yeah. And it's more so because of what machine learning allows us to do. And if you look at products that the gambling industry hasn't been exposed to from a Google point of view, and the most obvious one there is shopping campaigns and what happens on the retail side, that's already keywordless. To work with that product and give or take 50% of shopping activity with Google will flow through this product on top of search text ads, just to give you a feeling for the scale and size of the product. Okay. That's already keywordless, as I spoke to. And to use that product, you will feed in an outcome. What you would want out could be a target return on ad spend. You would connect it to your merchant center, and away it goes. And that product will optimize using the various products and channels that Google has in order to help you hit that target ROAS off the back of your merchant center and some creative assets that you can put on top of it. Yeah.
So just to be absolutely clear for Peter sitting at home in his living room, it's still very much keywords he types into Google when he uses search, but it's obviously the advertising solution behind it. So basically what we're saying is at some point, we don't know how long that piece of string is yet, but at some point, advertisers will not be able to bid on keywords effectively. Is that what we're saying?
I mean, again, as I've said, a heavy caveat here, and this isn't breaking news, but the direction of travel suggests that at some point, search advertising may well not involve bidding on or choosing your own keywords with which to bid on, which potentially presents some issues for a sensitive subject, such as the gambling industry. This industry relies on being compliant. This industry relies on probably more so than any other industry, a fairly robust negative targeting capability, whereby this industry can say, we do not want to appear on these keywords. So that will always have to be considered, and we'd imagine any future would take that into consideration. But if you think about our shopping products, so you think about our app product, our app product doesn't allow for too much manipulation, doesn't allow for too much targeting. You simply say, we want to achieve a cost per install of $10. Here are some creative assets. Off you go. Please go and do that for us. And here's our budget cap, and this is what we're looking to spend. Now, the advertisers that can feed that machine with slightly more data will typically have a better experience. So if you can say to the machine, here's our CPI, but alongside that, here's the gross gaming revenue we're looking to achieve against that ad spend, or here's the net gaming revenue we're looking to achieve against that ad spend, the machine can take all of that information on board and can go out and find the necessary clicks and impressions against the creative assets that you fed into it with which to perform. So that's the big enabler. This is all about machine learning. It's all about automation. And when we work with the industry, there are some clients that are bought into this. There are some clients that have adjusted their teams. There are some clients that have brought on a slightly different personnel set, with a slightly different skill set with which to take advantage of it, and they're massively reaping the rewards. But there are others that we still speak to, and it's as if nothing's changed since 2010. And that can make for an interesting back and forth between a Google team trying to support that business and helping to educate them against what the future is going to look like versus a set of practitioners or a team. And to a large degree, they're held back by potentially proxy metrics that are put on top of them, but that's a slightly different conversation. But so much of this is predicated on the back of machine learning and automation. And that's what allows us to look at a future without keywords.
So there's for sure a lot of people and teams and roles and meetings taking place, looking at sort of, especially within our industry, right? So looking at these are the most valuable players or the traffic we want to have on our site. Which keywords did they come from, and then optimize the strategy from there. So like you're saying, it's not here yet, but the direction of travel is moving to a world where that's no longer possible eventually one day. Like you will have some hints, but it will be much less granular. And the AI and the machine learning on Google's side of things will do a lot of the heavy lifting effectively. And like you're mentioning as well, the industry has to get comfortable with that. And also, the more comfortable the industry is with sharing data, the more accurate that machine will be at giving you what you want effectively, whether you're an operator or affiliate or whatever. Is that sort of a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that sums it up well. It's that idea of going after the user and not the keyword. So you're in effect stepping up a level. Now again, for a practitioner that has built his or her career on 10 years of keyword targeting with a specific set of keywords that they know deliver an output in the casino, or that might well be online casino or best casinos or whatever else. It's quite a sizable change. It's quite a sizable shift in the mentality. But if you ally that with 15% of Google searches are new every day, so your keywords will never take into consideration that 15% of new searches. Huge opportunity. Voice searches, they're changing how users are interacting with Google as a product. Can your keywords take into consideration those voice searches? So you're potentially leaving a whole bunch of searches whereby the intent of that search is to find an online casino, for example, but you're not covering it because you've got a fairly hardened set of keywords that you're comfortable with. And those keywords are typically in place based on a CPA.
Yeah.
And, you know, the very nature of a CPA is that it's an average. So we can probably assume that with this industry where the Pareto effect is pretty high, you know, 80% of the clicks might well be pointless and wasted.
Yeah.
Yet 20% of them might well be, you know, the clicks that everyone's chasing.
Mm-hmm.
What this keywordless, or even before we get to keywordless, what this automated future looks like is a world in which you can actually go after the user and therefore reduce the wastage associated with the 80% of clicks to those keywords that don't pay back for you. And by going after the user, whereby, you know, the keyword that you place an ad against their query is just one of, say, 10,000 signals that we can look at.
Yeah.
What a keywordless future starts to help you think about is a focus on the other 9,999 signals that you can perhaps attach yourself to, and not necessarily the keyword that person searches for. We know so much more about each of our users.
Yeah.
We can lean on that data, and what machine learning allows us to do is to allow an ad to be placed against all of that data, you know, in a split second.
Yeah.
By doing that, advertiser can take advantage. So a lot of our conversations now are around, can you feed gross gaming revenue through? Can you feed net gaming revenue through? And what the machine will do is go out and find users who can be a positive contributor to your gross gaming revenue.
Yeah.
Or can be a positive contribution to your net gaming revenue. And one really interesting use case that we've seen so far that a bunch of operators have started to play with is feeding through responsible gambling signals.
Okay.
And by feeding through responsible gambling signals, what you will then have search marketing do is go out and find users, again, not necessarily based on the keywords that they're typing in, that are more aligned to what a responsible player looks like.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you give an example of like what would those kind of signals be? Or like when you say responsible gambling signals, what would they be feeding through?
I mean, it would be for each operator to decide, but the output of that would be perhaps a score between 1 and 100.
Yeah.
You know, they could hash that. We would never have to know what that score is. And again, I think that's something that a bunch of operators are still getting used to. You know, there's a bunch of compliance teams that we have to work with.
Yeah.
But that can be anything. They will have their own, I'd imagine their own ML, their own machine learning systems that look at, you know, the propensity for a user to become a problem gambler. And that can be based on, I don't know, you know, I'd imagine there's an element of deposits and losses and whatever else. And they can start to feed that data. As long as they can package that up, they can feed that data through a 1 to 100 score, 100 being these are the exact customers that we want. These are responsible customers. These are the customers that we want to acquire, versus a 1, whereby avoid these users. So regardless of the keywords that those users are looking for, the machine already knows to bid down on those users. They're not users that are going to contribute positively to the signals that we're now feeding into the machine. So already you start to get a feel for what does the future practitioner looks like in this world that could potentially be keywordless. You know, what does that future practitioner look like? Someone who can understand all of that data, someone who can play with that data, knowing that so many of the tasks that certainly I grew up on as I was making my way through search marketing don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
They've been automated. Yeah.
I was going to say, if there's some positive to look at here as well, I think, you know, having spent 15 years in this industry and in marketing as well, you know, something that you have to sort of remind yourself of very often, especially on the digital side of things, is to sort of pull yourself back, saying, you know, these are real human beings. You know, it's Peter and Pia and Louise and whatever, and it's not numbers, right? So I think by, you know, maybe that's one of the things that it will sort of force the industry to become even better at thinking about real human beings, personas. You know, like you're saying, it's not that super granular keyword level. It's 1 or 2 steps further up, which hopefully could contribute to that. I don't know what you think. Just a different perspective on it.
Oh, completely. And you know, those practitioners start to do, you know, cooler stuff around strategic projects, new ideas, creative, user experience, landing page optimization. There's so many more tasks that require a creative angle that the machine just can't take into consideration. There's the chance to look at look at data and start to segment and start to really work out, how can we get the best out of this channel? Not just what have we done previously and how can we repeat the next year, but can we reduce the CPA by 10% and increase the volume by 10%? Which is pretty much.
Yeah, I think there's so much of our headspace and our hours of the day that goes into attribution, measurement, tracking, all the granular details, and of course a lot of that will still exist. But would it be fair to say maybe we're overdoing it slightly? Maybe there is a world where we should let the machines handle a lot of that, optimize on our behalf, and that will free up some it will lift us a few steps up the ladder. And I think that would be greatly beneficial, to be honest, for the industry and marketers overall.
100%. And there's this weird phenomenon known as algorithm aversion, whereby people get upset when algorithms fail.
Okay.
And they struggle to forgive the algorithm. Whereas should a human have failed in the same way, it's quite quickly forgotten and we move on.
Yeah.
But should a machine fail, it leaves a lasting mark. And smart bidding, 2-3 years ago, is nowhere near the product that smart bidding is today.
Mm-hmm.
But a bunch of the conversations that we have, some of them can go, this is exactly what we're trying to do. But for a whole bunch of them, there's this idea of, well, it doesn't really work, does it? We tried it 2 years ago, or we tried to do this 3 years ago, and it didn't really work. So we're just gonna stick to what we've been doing. So there's this idea of just constantly testing the technology, constantly looking at how does it shape up against our manual bidding practices, or how does it shape up against how we go into an event. And certainly on the sports betting side of this industry, where you're never more than a month away from the next big event, and there's that risk and the algorithm aversion and the idea of, but if the machines don't work for the event, then we're not going to hit targets, and that's clearly a bad thing. So we have to work with that constantly. But no, to your point, there's lots more that practitioners can be putting their time into, given that so many of the practices that we just took for granted or we focused on are now automated.
Fantastic. You touched briefly on audio search as well. Let's just briefly touch on that. So just do you have any stats like how big is audio search today?
This is a really interesting one. It's a really interesting one. Actually, I was doing a piece in audio search a few months ago, and what becomes instantly obvious, even when going through and working with the product managers here, that 2 years ago this was a much bigger deal than it is today. And 2 years ago, it was all about Alexa and Google Home and whatever else. And what's that going to mean? And more so the literature being put together in and around this was on SEO. And how do we need to adjust our site setups to be able to take advantage of slightly longer searches, and what does that mean? But as we've started to understand the data, 45% of voice searches come from someone in a car. Interacting with either Android or Apple or whatever else. That's 45% of all voice searches. And then 25% of them, happen within the home, mostly within a kitchen.
So car is much bigger than home audio search today, effectively.
Completely. Okay. And there isn't a whole bunch of monetizable opportunities around someone either looking for directions, trying to change the radio, in terms of putting a different channel on. You get an understanding for what the basic commands would be through audio search. Then things that happen in the kitchen, mostly recipes, mostly looking for. If it's my home, it's mostly putting a timer on for eggs, and that's about the extent of it. I'm not sure many people are going to monetize.
Not so relevant for the iGaming industry, perhaps. But
exactly. And then there's the personal assistant side of it. So
unless you can bet on it, which egg is going to cook the There's some innovation sitting here, Chris. You need to patent this.
It'd be green every time. And then there's the personal assistant side of it as well. So I have a Google Home that sits in my kitchen. I will ask it about my day every so often, get a feeling for the calendar, get a feeling for what's going on. But again, it's not necessarily monetizable. And
what about people sitting on their mobile phones or on their desktop? Sorry, I guess mobile phones is the use case, right? So as opposed to trying to type with one finger or whatever, just clicking on the microphone and saying, find me the best online casino.
Yeah, and look, there's an input. I think 2 years ago we were telling the world that 20% of all searches are now voice search. I was speaking to the product managers a couple of months ago. We don't have an updated figure to that.
Yeah,
we're not being asked for an updated figure to that. It's not quite as front and center as perhaps it once was. All it's typically meaning is longer searches, and from a paid point of view, semantics takes that into consideration. We've made some changes to match types, and again, we're getting into quite a lot of detail here. We've made some changes to match types that allows for voice searches to be taken into consideration as and when a practitioner is building out their search campaigns. So there isn't a whole load that a marketing team really needs to take into consideration in and around what's going on from a voice search point of view. There's a hell of a lot, certainly from a mobile phone point of view, that's voice to display.
Yeah, exactly. No, I guess some of the conversations I have been part of, at least, was sort of more that as people would be, their every day is faster and faster. They simply don't have, why would I type if I can just, use audio and then return a result? So as opposed to, find me the best sports betting exchange, they should just say, find me Betfair or whatever it may be. So, and therefore there is a lot more importance on building brand, building salience, building top of mind, because you want users to click on the microphone and say, find me X brand, as opposed to, you're not going to look at the search results coming back. You just want to go there much faster than skimming through 10 results effectively. So shifting or increasing the importance of building brand, I guess, as an operator.
And I would 100% advocate for that, but in order to influence voice search will probably be reason number 7 as to why you should be investing in your brand, why you should be looking to create something that stands out in what is a fairly crowded marketplace. But there would be no doubt a positive knock-on effect for voice searches. And again, I work for Google. I don't see people walking down the street talking into their phones just yet. I don't sit on the tube. I haven't been on the tube for about 12 months. I don't sit on the tube. I don't sit on the tube and see people talking into their phone just yet. So yes, it's a thing. Is it something that should be front and center from a marketing strategy point of view? I don't think so just yet.
It's like VR 10 years ago kind of thing.
Correct. I remember when I put my Google glasses on and I thought, this is it. This is the future.
It will be one day, Chris. It will be one day when you do lenses, right?
If you're a surgeon,
when is it coming? When is it coming, Chris? Google lenses.
Well, if you're a surgeon, it's already a big part of your world. I just don't feel as it's quite ready for mass consumption just yet.
No,
well, certainly in pockets. It was. I'm not sure. Did you ever play around with Google glasses?
I didn't myself, actually. No, I've never tried them.
It was brilliant. Like, it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It just didn't quite meet with user expectation. It's a bit weird to think that you're sat on a tube and you've got the ability to take pictures of everyone simply by blinking. It's a bit weird as it started to get explained to the general public.
Too early. Chris, this is a fantastic conversation. We're already over time. We've gone for more than an hour. Are you okay for another 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes?
Yeah.
Cool. I want to go back to YouTube. You were mentioning it a little bit in the beginning. So let's talk a little about YouTube. For me, there's kind of two things. There's the content side of things. Really interesting to hear your thoughts on streaming. What's the future of content? Is it short form, long form, all these kind of things, and that could be really fun. Also, YouTube Shorts. I don't know how widely launched it has been yet, but it would be fun to hear about that. Let's start there. Content on YouTube. What's the latest and greatest? What's top of mind on your side of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, YouTube's a weird and wonderful beast, and I alluded to at the start of our conversation watching Joe Wicks's exercise videos, helped maintain my sanity at the start of lockdown. And that's YouTube in its purest form. It's a home for people's passions. I like the NFL. I'm not exposed to the same content that's available in the US. Yeah, I know I can pop onto YouTube and watch Pat McAfee or Colin Cowherd or ESPN or the NFL content channel. So I'm surrounded by content that I want to consume when I want to consume it. So in itself, YouTube has a standout proposition, and the content that's on the platform has been through a little bit of a journey in recent years. If you were to think back 2 or 3 years ago, we probably didn't have the same level of premium content on the platform that we even have today. From a UK point of view, 15 minutes after every Sky Sports game, there will be a 6-minute highlight clip posted onto YouTube. 15 minutes to 30 minutes after every BT Sport game, there'll be a 6-minute highlight clip posted onto the platform. I had a chat with the NBA a few weeks ago, and they've been on the platform for 15 years and have posted some 80,000 videos, and they can now interact with 80 million uniques across the world. Again, it's mind-blowing to think about the control that they can have on their content, but also the distribution potential through a single global platform. And Byron Sharp calls it the first global ad-supported TV channel. And that's very much where it's at. And the content has been on a journey, and we're now in a place whereby there's the premium offerings, there's the behind the scenes and the fringe stuff. And again, I'm thinking about this through a sports lens. But then there's the player stuff, whereby the player can own his or her own content. There's the fan created stuff, and again, that each brings its own audience, and each brings an opportunity from an advertising side in which you can attach yourself. Arsenal TV, again over here in the UK, it polarizes Arsenal football fans, but it gets a hell of a lot of views. And there's opportunities for sports betting companies to perhaps attach themselves to those views. And from a pure numbers point of view, it becomes interesting how users engage with that content. Again, in the UK, we had 20 million people in December watching YouTube via their TV. That's a big number. 20 million people watching YouTube via their TV. In the US, it's 120 million people would watch YouTube content through their TV.
So roughly the same ratio, actually. That's interesting. One third of the population, roughly, give or take.
Correct. And that's okay. That in itself brings about, and again with my marketing and advertising hat on, that brings about a whole bunch of complexities associated with AV planning, and where does YouTube fit into that media mix? 3 or 4 years ago, it was the domain of the performance practitioner or the search practitioner. What YouTube sat, you could buy it through AdWords. So you deal with it. Deal with it and tell us about the CPA. Is
YouTube reach and frequency, or is it CPA? Am I trying to build my brand here, or is it hardcore performance marketing? What's your view?
I mean, again, if it was me and I was spending my money, I'd be using it for reach and frequency. I'd very much be thinking about it as a way in which I could hit 18 to 34s. We have 98% reach of 18 to 34s. That's the future of any sports betting or casino company, or any bingo company or whatever else. There's 90 minutes of content consumed on YouTube by 18 to 34s every day. That's out of 6 hours of total content consumption. Live TV is about 75 minutes, and a chunk of that's the BBC, which you can't advertise on. So the opportunity is extensive, certainly from a brand building point of view.
So I guess where the conversation still sits, right, is if you want to reach the masses and you want to build brand, in a big way, then it's still TV, and YouTube is is let's say secondary in that conversation. Are you saying now that YouTube, from a reach perspective, reach and frequency, YouTube can now match TV or even better than TV? Is that sort of the view on it, or is it more like being part of the mix? Like how would you say?
Yeah, there's still a balance to be struck. And I think at this point, YouTube is still a incremental option on top of TV.
Mm-hmm.
But again, within this industry, what we have to be considerate of is the complexities and nuances that are not familiar to other industries. So, for example, you would have the whistle-to-whistle ban
mm-hmm.
in the UK. You would have the 9 p.m. watershed. You would have the exposure risk
mm-hmm.
of under 18s seeing your ads. You just can't stop that.
Yeah.
Whereas on a platform such as YouTube, we only allow you to target 18 plus logged in users. So a user must be logged in and have declared that they are over 18. So
mm-hmm.
in itself, there's a protection built into it. As I've said to you before, we offer category opt-out. So any user can say, I just don't want to see gambling ads.
So they can literally deselect the entire gambling category.
Correct.
And that's it. If they tick that box, that's it. Game over.
That's it. No gambling ads. And again, these are the benefits of being online. So you get this convergence effect whereby, if we were to think about YouTube now being, in effect, a TV channel, let's
mm-hmm.
look at it through that lens and use that as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yet you get the benefits of targeting that comes with digital. Yet you get the benefits of the protections that we can put in place that comes through digital. You very quickly get this very promising proposition that should be a fundamental part of every operator, even an aggregator to an extent, reach and frequency plans.
Yeah, and something like category opt-out. My mind also goes to the creators, the content creators, right? It's a hot potato in the industry, especially the casino streamers, on YouTube and Twitch and the like, and sort of there's a lot of controversy around, how hardcore can you be? How big wins can you show? How big can your average bet size be? For that to be sort of a good way of a good content piece, and I guess sort of now that there is a opt out of the entire category, I would say that speaks to thinking long term and building content that is sustainable, that is responsible, that is entertaining, and not just sort of short-term hardcore content, if that makes sense. I don't know how to describe it better. I don't know. What's your view on casino streaming in general, Chris? And how do you feel creators and operators, I guess, should think about this space? How should they behave? And how should they act?
Okay. Again, there's a lot in that. I said at the start of the YouTube piece that for me, YouTube allowed me to explore my passions. That's what YouTube allows. And if an individual's passion is to watch others hitting big game jackpots or to watch someone playing a slot machine, then YouTube presents a home, for that activity. Yeah. Whether or not we choose to allow monetization of that content is a different
mm-hmm.
is a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And should we allow monetization of that content? Whether or not an operator then chooses to monetize or to advertise against that content is again a different conversation. We offer the opportunity to opt out of all live streaming ads. We would typically advise to opt out of all live streaming ads just because of the unpredictability that's attached to that content, and the fact that this industry is already on a bit of a knife edge when it comes to its advertising practices. Now, there would be some edge cases whereby certain channels might well have a relationship with an operator, and therefore they would want to advertise against that. Absolutely. There might well be a relationship whereby there's in-video advertising, that sits outside of perhaps the products that we offer. Absolutely, would advocate for that. And as to whether or not an operator should advertise or whether or not an operator should partner with live streaming, I think it comes down to what that operator is trying to achieve and the objectives and the strategy and ultimately the value that an operator would see out of that. I certainly don't think there shouldn't be a place for that.
Mm-hmm.
But whether or not that fits with what said operator is trying to achieve, that's for the operator to determine. And from a YouTube and a platform point of view, we will provide the constructs with which to do that as safely as you can. But there would be elements outside of our control that an advertiser would have to be comfortable with.
Yeah. So, for example, the content of a stream, let's take a casino stream, for example, how much would YouTube go in and sort of scrutinize and look at, or a policy team or a moderation team saying, okay, these guys are, too aggressive, or these guys are clearly, for example, someone playing for, tens of thousands of pounds, or, 2,000 euro bets nonstop for 24 hours versus someone who is much more responsible, much smaller bet sizes, shorter sessions, et cetera, et cetera. Is it on the operator to find out what they're comfortable with and what they want to sort of monetize, support, work with in terms of content creators? Or is there also a moderation piece sitting on your side of what you will sort of tolerate, if you will?
Yeah, so there would be an element of brand suitability moderation on our side.
Yeah.
And by that I mean we don't allow ads against all channels. A channel will have to meet certain thresholds.
Yeah.
And that's determined through, number of subscribers. So you would have to have a minimum number of subscribers. You would have to have a minimum number of YouTube videos that have been put up. So we can look at all channels that have been that are able to advertise, and we can put a brand suitability check on top of that. But what we can't do is determine is determined to any great degree how well a channel sets up against industry morals or the rights and wrongs of what should happen within a given industry. It's very difficult for us to police that part of it, which is where we would then put that onus on the operator. And then it's for the operator to be comfortable through the regulation in whatever country they're in as to how that's set up against whatever advertising codes exist.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic.
So that's a long way of me saying, yeah, we put it on the operator.
Exactly. Well, that's absolutely fine. Great. So we're coming to the end here. Let's look at geography, a look around the world. Google Play Store finally opening for gambling apps. And I guess the question on everyone's mind is, why did it take so long?
Yeah, I mean, this has perhaps been my Everest. It's perhaps the best way of describing it. And we were able to open up to DFS apps, 4 or 5 years ago. Social gambling, we opened up social gambling again quite a long time ago. Then we opened up real money gambling in the UK, Ireland, and France. And we expected that we'd have a fast follow attached to that, whereby we would look at the rest of Europe, South America, and we'd have a structured rollout program into new regulated markets. What happened was the processes that underpinned the structure that allowed us to go live with real money gambling apps wasn't fit for purpose, had a bunch of holes in it. And from a tech and engineering side, the business would never be comfortable in scaling anything that has holes. So we had to go back to the drawing board to work out how Google was going to operate sustainably within this space. And play and ads are a little bit church and state, and they're two very different beasts with different policies and whatever else. We had to look at all of that and see how that could come together. And then a bunch of macro factors just delayed the process, delayed the program, which set us back a little bit. But we eventually got there, much to the frustration of a lot of the industry. And I was on the receiving end of that frustration at every single ICE event, G2E event, or whatever else, and to a degree, rightly so. But we're there now, and we do have a rollout plan that will take us beyond the 19 countries that we are currently open for.
How has it been received? Like, how's it been going? Well, it's about 3 months ago, something like that. When did you open up? February?
I mean, yeah, it would have been about 3 months ago.
Yeah,
it's gone down. Look, it's gone down well. To a lot of operators, there's an element of, to your point, what took you so long?
Yeah,
but we're happy that it's there.
Yeah.
To others, there's still some inherent frustrations that some countries didn't make the list.
We're missing Portugal so far.
I think
at least Portugal.
I think I've had the best part of 100 LinkedIn messages to tell me that Portugal was missed off the list, and we'll look to rectify that as soon
No
as we
timelines
can.
yet. We can't do any breaking news here, Chris, on Portugal.
I've been burnt before with announcing timelines, and I always find from a managing expectations point of view, it doesn't do anyone any favors.
Fair enough.
It's something that we are that we are looking to change, and there's elements of sub-Saharan Africa and South America that were also not included. So we're all looking at a bunch of other countries. We're looking at a bunch of other US states as well. The rollout didn't take into account every single regulated state, and that's something that we also have to tackle. Yeah. So we're looking at that
What's
as well.
What's the state of play in the US now for sports betting and the casino side of things, if you will? What's the
on the play side?
Yeah.
So we're still looking to open up in Michigan and Virginia.
Okay.
Which again is frustrating for the operators out there. That's where they're looking to establish share.
Yeah.
It's where they're looking to mitigate against the unregulated offshore market, and play is a great way of doing that.
Yeah.
Sideloading an APK is just never a great experience. So we are looking to plug that gap as quickly as possible. So we should hopefully have some positive movement on Virginia and Michigan, in the next week or so. And then, look, the position we want to take is that we can get to a place where we allow for pre-registration. Therefore, come day one of any state launch, your app is ready to go. And that's the position we're looking to get to pretty quickly. And with Arizona, Connecticut, Maryland, New York, Florida, all getting close, we have the football season coming at us pretty quickly as well. We know the timelines that we're working to, and that's the big push for us right now.
Very good. Very good. How much of your time do you spend on the US? Obviously for the industry, US is huge, and everyone is, it's the hottest potato in the industry, I would say, at the minute, right? How is it, within Google's walls, US versus Europe versus LATAM, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, big. And for me, it's been a huge part of what I've been doing for the past 3 years. We were very close to the PASPA repeal. We then started to work out how we would support the industry pretty quickly as a result of that.
Yeah.
It's meant that I spent a lot of time in New York, Boston, Chicago, which sounds great, but when you're doing New York, Boston, Chicago in 3 days and heading back to your two kids under 2, it presents a slightly different challenge. I just hoped if the PASPA repeal would have been 3 to 5 years earlier, it would have made for a slightly different experience. But so it was good to we've been in place since day dot, and we've got teams set up to help us support that industry. For me, it takes up a significant portion of my time. There's a different consumer over in the US, and that's taken us a while to get used to. The proposition and product is different over there. From a marketing point of view, it's quite promotion heavy.
That's an interesting point, right? Because that's something we how can I say, in some ways, obviously the US market is 15 years behind the European market, if you will. And if we look back at the European market, it was all about these grand prizes and thousands of this and sort of slowly, and it's still like that in certain markets, right? But then the more mature the market, it seems to be more sort of approachable, transparent, no T's and C's, but lower value, lower amounts in terms of welcome bonuses or whatever. So as the US opens up, would you go back to where Europe was 15 years, because that's where sort of the mindset of the consumer is in the US? Or are they keeping track? Are they fully up to date with wherever Europe is, and you should just continue off where we are today, and sort of it's effectively the same whether it's US or Europe? Not obviously the consumer is different, but sort of your promotional strategy, if you will, your product strategy, et cetera, et cetera. What's your thoughts?
I think the strategy is born out of the conditions with which they're operating within at the moment. I think regulation is happening a lot faster than anyone was expecting. The pandemic has probably driven that even faster than what was already a pretty fast-paced rollout. The fact that we've probably got potentially 4 states that could regulate within the next 3 or 4 months. Again, they were looking at a potential calendar of 2 to 3 states a year. So it's all happening pretty quick. And that then brings about some inherent challenges for marketers.
Yeah.
Whereby there's a lot of Me Too products. It's effectively a commodity. It doesn't give them a hell of a lot to work with. Prices, there's not a hell of a lot of difference between the prices.
Yeah.
There are some subtle product differences, but there's not loads at this point. Place has been interesting. Some of the media deals that we're seeing, some of the partnerships that are happening, certainly from a sports team point of view, but also the leagues and the various media companies. I mean, some of the contracts that have been signed are eye-watering. Certainly looking at them from a UK lens. But then first mover advantage is critically important over there, and they all recognise that. And the user journey is all. Again, I think this is something that we sometimes forget looking at it from a UK point of view. There is no mobile web proposition. There's no mobile web. It's all app.
Yeah.
And if I look at the UK makeup and look at it through the lens of query data and the user, mobile web is up there with perhaps not at app level, but it's certainly significant, and that's just not part of the mix in the US. It's all driving to app, and Android's a frustration as part of that.
Why is that? Is that just consumption habits, or the mobile web product is not allowed or not there, or depends by state, or?
Yeah, it's regulation. There's a need for a piece of technology called GeoComply, which has to be set locally. The app allows for that. It doesn't work really from a mobile web point of view, and that something has to be downloaded to say that yes, you are executing your bet within the state. That's a huge part of the US rollout, and again, that's often where us Europeans can look at the US as one collective homogenous country, whereas in reality it's 50 states, and each one's got a slightly different take on how it wants to regulate. And again, in itself, that poses a whole bunch of challenges and therefore opportunities for the marketing folk over there. But the interactions we've had, there are some of the smartest people we've certainly worked with in the US tackling these challenges. So I think they'll be in a good place, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the industry evolves over the next 2 to 3 years. I think there'll be some pretty big changes. They've kind of gone through the Me Too, let's just get a product out there, and I think there'll be some pretty interesting and fun changes that we'll all get to enjoy.
Yeah, it'll be fun. A few words on Germany. What's happening? I mean, obviously, interstate treaty is coming. There's a lot of things. So is Google?
We're set to go. Yeah, we're set to go. I think July 1st. July 1st. So we're all set to go from July 1st. So we've already started to look at our policies, and we've already started to look at the processes. So the Play Store is already open. Yeah. So we should be in a good place come July 1st.
Fantastic. Very good. Any new markets, emerging markets you want to sort of point out or highlight, something that's big on your agenda?
I mean, no. I mean, the US and Germany are probably taking up much of my time. We've got the processes necessary now to launch in any regulated market.
Yeah.
We're keeping a pretty close tabs on Sub-Saharan Africa and South America, and just trying to make sure that as Google, we're comfortable with the regulation. We also look at PR effect and a few other factors that we have to green light before we go into any country. It's not necessarily just set on regulation, but by and large, should a country regulate and therefore take control for the rules and regs of the gambling industry, we're generally pretty comfortable.
It's a bigger piece for sure, and a lot of complexity to navigate, I'm sure. Great. Chris, this has been fantastic. So we've come to the end of all the topics I had listed down at least. Are there any other topics you want to touch on, or else I have a very fascinating lightning round to get to know you a little bit better here at the end and move away from heavy regulations. Is there anything else you want to throw in the mix? Something that's important for you or Google at the minute? Something operators, affiliates, or content creators should definitely be aware of?
Look, I think we've covered quite a lot. So I wouldn't say there's perhaps anything over and above what we've covered. So no, let's get stuck into this lightning round.
Very, very good. And just to summarize some very big topics, right? I mean, the loss of third-party cookies, direction of travel away from or moving to keywordless research or search. A lot of stuff happening on YouTube and the Play Store opening. It's a very, very interesting time for sure. Great. So, Chris, this is how it works. Very, very short. I give you one word. You give me your immediate thoughts, and you have like 5 seconds per question. Okay, so very, very short. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
That's good. Man United.
Disappointing.
Casino welcome bonuses.
Too many.
Elon Musk.
Visionary.
NFTs.
Garbage.
And last but not least, your personal mobile. Is it an iPhone or an Android?
I've never owned an iPhone.
Ooh.
Yeah, never. Even pre-Google, never owned an iPhone.
Fantastic. Good. With that said, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time. I think it's been sort of the longest podcast in history, 1 hour and 1.5 hours almost. So really, really appreciate your time. It's fascinating to hear all the stuff happening inside Google, and I'm sure much more to come. And soon you'll have your 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, I think you get a certificate. I don't think there's a gold watch on offer.
No gold watch.
I'd take more stock. Just if they were to throw me a few more stock units, I'd be more than happy. But yeah, no gold watch. I think just a certificate. Sorry. I think you get massage points, but given we can't have a massage right now,
it'll have to be later. You'll have to save it up on your loyalty card, I guess.
I'll store them.
Perfect. Chris, it's been a pleasure. Have a fantastic day and speak to you soon.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the time.
Bye.